Eleanor Hines from Resources here with John Guenther, Site Manager from the Department of Ecology, to talk to you about the million-gallon tanks, ChemFix, and stormwater swale areas. During Stop 2, I talked about the MACA process where the preferred alternative in the feasibility study was selected, which was alternative 4 in this case. In Stops 4 through 6, we will take a closer look at how the draft cleanup action plan further develops preferred alternative 4. Before we start with the technical aspects of this tour stop, John, could you give us a real quick overview of what are the responsibilities of a site manager with the Washington State Department of Ecology?
Thanks, Eleanor. I've been a professional hydrogeologist working on cleanup sites since about 1988 and licensed in Washington since 2002. I've been a cleanup site manager with Ecology since 2013. As a site manager for Ecology, I'm responsible for the administration of the state's cleanup regulations, the Model Toxics Control Act, or MOTCA, and overseeing cleanup projects. I track schedules, MOTCA compliance, the application of best available science, and review technical documents. I also manage and track legal agreements and grant funding contract obligations. Basically, I'm a liaison between Ecology and the PLPs and their consultants, overseeing work being done as required by MOTCA and the sediment management standards.
Let's start with the ChemFix area. As mentioned in previous tour stop videos, this area was already capped and treated chemically to be stabilized. Can you talk about what is left to address for the final cleanup in this area and how the draft cleanup action plan ensures permanent protection?
Sure. During the mid-1970s, an estimated 8,000 cubic yards of mercury contaminated sludge were removed from a wastewater settling basin on site. The sludge was chemically treated using a proprietary solidification process called ChemFix, buried and capped in the area we now refer to as the ChemFix area. The ChemFix stabilization process prevents the mercury from becoming soluble or vaporizing, and the effectiveness of that process is supported by testing data. The ChemFix area is capped by a combination of impermeable geotextile covered by asphalt, and a 1977 order issued by Ecology requires that the cap not be disturbed without prior approval by Ecology. The hard impermeable cap that currently covers this area will be inspected, maintained, or amended or repaired if necessary to prevent human and terrestrial exposure and erosion of the underlying soil.
Next, let's talk about the million-gallon tanks. You can still see evidence of these tanks from the circles in the cement left behind where they once stood. Some held just lignin, but one held petroleum, and there are petroleum compounds found in the soil and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, also known as PAHs, found in groundwater. There were also some miscellaneous metals found in groundwater in the area. Groundwater contamination can often span across different areas of sites. In this case, it looks like there is a groundwater monitoring area in the draft cleanup action plan that spans across both the million-gallon tanks and ChemFix areas. Could you talk about the plan to clean this area up?
An estimated 6,000 cubic yards of petroleum and PAH compound contaminated soil will remain in the million-gallon tanks area. This area will be covered with an impermeable cap to prevent infiltration. The groundwater contamination you are referring to is not associated with the ChemFix area. The metals present in this area are relatively immobile, and it is anticipated that the petroleum and PAH compounds in groundwater will attenuate over time from the natural chemical, physical, and biological processes. We refer to this type of cleanup as monitored natural attenuation, or M&A. The rate at which the contaminants break down or attenuate will be monitored. The cleanup plan includes contingent actions in case the contaminants do not attenuate over a reasonable period of time, and that period of time would be determined by ecology as part of the 5-year periodic reviews conducted as part of the required compliance monitoring.
The stormwater swale area, located near the property edge by the fence with the railroad tracks on the other side, received stormwater runoff from the chlorine plant where the mercury was handled and was found to have relatively lower concentrations of mercury compared to other areas of this site. But nonetheless, there is still mercury contamination there. Can you talk about how the draft cleanup action plan will address this contamination?
We estimate approximately 1,400 cubic yards of mercury contaminated soil in the stormwater swale area, limited to the upper couple of feet. Contaminated soil on the BNSF railroad property will be excavated and consolidated with the mercury contaminated soil on the port property, buried along the stormwater swale and capped to prevent infiltration.
There seems to be a mix of remedies at this site, including stabilizing contaminants on site, as well as some removal, though ultimately the final cleanup aims to protect human and environmental health. Could you briefly explain the rationale behind when and why some contaminants may be removed while others will remain on site? And for the contaminants that remain on site, are there any risks to the public and workers using this area?
Ecology would almost always prefer that all contamination be removed from a cleanup site, understanding that it has to go somewhere. The decision of whether contamination is removed or contained on site is typically determined during the disproportionate cost analysis part of the feasibility study. In the case of the chloralkali area, excavation and offsite disposal of everything was disproportionately costly compared to the environmental benefit. The selected cleanup actions meet all of the MOPCA's cleanup standards and will be protective of the public and future workers using this area.
Now, to be clear, this draft cleanup action plan only involves cleaning up contaminated soil and groundwater. How will the mercury contamination that has migrated offsite into the sediments of Whatcom Waterway be addressed?
The aquatic area of the Whatcom Waterway and Bellingham Bay contaminated by mercury is the Whatcom Waterway cleanup site, an entirely in-water cleanup site. Lucy McInerney at Ecology is the cleanup site manager for that site, and I would suggest that people go to the site's website for information on what has already been done and what future plans are for that site.
John, is there anything else that you would like to add about the cleanup for this particular area that would be helpful or interesting for folks to know?
Not really. I would just suggest that people read the draft cleanup action plan and submit comments and questions during the public review period.
Thanks so much, John, for helping us better understand the cleanup for this area. Next, Kirsten will talk with Steve from Aspect Consulting about the cleanup plans for the chlorine plant area, where the highest concentrations of mercury were found. So be sure to keep following the tour to learn more.